This is Real Talk, the customer insights show with Jen Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jen and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by VoxPopMe, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand your customers better. I'm Jen Vogel, and today I want to talk about Gen Z. This is a topic we've previously discussed with Hana Ben-Shabet, but I want to dive into this topic a little bit more today. And so today I'm joined by the host of the Happy Market Research podcast and co-founder and chairman of HubUX, Jamin Brazil. Welcome to the show, Jamin.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm a little nervous interviewing a fellow podcaster, so please don't judge me.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way every time I talk to you. So it goes both ways.
It's either going to be really good or really bad because we'll just be stopping each other going, no, that's
good.
Not how I would ask that question.
I actually do that in all of my podcasts when I listen to them in post-production. I think, why did I ask the question like that? That's so bad.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, we'll try not to do that live so everyone can enjoy this conversation and we'll just critique each other after. How's that?
Sounds good.
Amazing. So let's jump in. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and tell about your interest in Gen Z specifically from an MR perspective?
So my background, primary market research in the mid 90s. And from there, I moved into really a technology focus, trying to streamline the survey process. And Jamie Plunkett and myself started a survey platform called Decipher. Decipher, I'm not sure currently, but it was used by 75% of the Fortune 100. Grew that company for about 15 years and then sold it to Focus Vision. Focus Vision in those days was the leader of video-based streaming of focus groups and IDIs, integrated with large-scale facilities like Schlesinger and others. And so it's been a lot of fun in really the technology stack of market research, but then. In the last 3 years after I exited Focus Vision, I have been really enjoying getting back into primary market research, as well as technology, of course, but and doing a lot of just primary research. And one of the things that I've fallen into, I would say, is fatherhood, and a lot of and so and I have some teenagers, Gen Z, and the way that I connect with them and the way they connect with me in the world is so different. It's really kind of caused me to create this like passion project initially around getting to know Gen Z. And I think part of my meta is as a dad, as a Gen Xer, my worldview is just so changed or different than theirs. I'll give you a little example if that's okay, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I know this is live on LinkedIn, so I'm going to try to be like super filtered here, but the amount of exposure that Gen Z, or the amount of things that Gen Z has access to, is so greater than any previous generation, right? I mean, they are quite literally the digital first generation. Gen Alpha, of course, coming up behind them. Going to be really interesting to watch that dynamic. But they have unfettered access to quite literally any and everything relative to knowledge. When I was growing up, my knowledge was limited to the public library, which you think about the content in the local public library in the small municipality, very isolated from major cities. I was probably dealing with content that was years, if not decades old. And then on top of that, I was only able to access that content when I would get a chance to go to the library, which was not, but maybe once a month. And so my friends and I were, we grew up in this like rural area, and there was a Stop and Go, which was a gas station / mini mart. And behind the cashier was all the things that we wanted access to, right? So we wanted access to cigarettes at 12 years old. Just not proponent of those kinds of things, right? There were some other magazines, some fine reading that was behind there as well, that of course we wanted access to. And because, I mean, as a kid growing up in that framework, there was really no access outside of literally going to the store and then seeing the thing that was quite literally a barrier to be able to access. And so, one day my friends and I jumped on our bikes and rode 1.5 miles to the convenience store, the Shop and Go. And I had, in shaky handwriting with my friends, we collaborated on a note that we would present to the cashier, written supposedly by my dad, who was very sick apparently, and couldn't leave the house. And the only two things that my dad wanted, because he was so sick, was a Playboy magazine and some marble lights. And so,
that's exactly what I'm looking for when I'm sick. Like that's
Totally.
the best medicine is cigarettes and magazines.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? And so, so like the amount of, and of course he fell off his chair and died laughing. I was sweating, like shaking and sweating, and I thought I might go to prison. Yeah, and so you like contrast that experience with the amount of access that this generation has to that, plus quite literally anything else. Thinking about like how to. It used to be the case that if I got a flat tire, I would, I had to call my dad and say, how do I fix this flat tire? Well, now you don't have to do that anymore. Now you can just Google, how do I fix a flat tire? And then have that answer quite literally inside of seconds, and probably more accurately than would have ever been before. And so this level of unfettered access that Gen Z has changed the whole way that they view the world, has changed their value system, and has changed the way that they're connecting with brands.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you draw those parallels. And I can remember doing like research projects when I was in school on Encarta 95, which was like basically an encyclopedia that was on a CD-ROM.
Right.
And Lord knows how out of date that content was by the time it actually got into my hands. But it was one step forward from having to go to the library. I actually had if you didn't have a full set of encyclopedias, it was on a CD-ROM, which probably, I don't even think those exist anymore. But yeah, it's totally different. The access
and you think
to
about the cost, like that actually probably costs money, right? Unless you procured it from a free source like a library. My parents legitimately wanted to buy a full set of encyclopedias, and that was hundreds of dollars, which it was outside of our financial ability to access. But there's clearly a connection between individual, like your knowledge, and then your ability to apply that knowledge and cultivate your skills to become better at something, that drives your ultimate ability to succeed in life and provide self-confidence and also some context of who you are in the world. This generation, Gen Z, is a generation that has such a much larger, more complete view of the world than any other previous generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it's really interesting to frame it that way. I have we'll go down a side rabbit hole that I'll try to pull us back from, but I talk to a lot of people about imposter syndrome all the time. Nobody ever feels like they're, doing their job properly or qualified for life in the same way. And so the joke is that like nobody actually knows what they're doing. We're all just Googling it and pretending like we know. And so that's the way that we combat our imposter syndrome, is
totally
just by
true.
Googling things. But it's so true. They, younger generations just have a much more well-rounded kind of view of the world for that reason. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I am not yet familiar with what the definition of Gen Alpha. So what is that age bracket then that's kind of coming up behind Gen Z? That's like, we're always behind, right? like Gen Z's old hat. Now we've got to worry about Gen Alpha. Like, how old is that? My kid? Like,
so you have a child. I've seen that awesome dance that you did with him on
dance,
LinkedIn.
yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know. It's so good. And it's so interesting, like the meta of that, of like engaging with having your child teach you something, and then engaging with them on in that activity, and then creating a connection point to our professional lives. And then that having an impact on our immediate network, right? It's a very powerful way of framing how the world has fundamentally changed in the last 2 years or 18 months. It used to be the case, there was a much clearer divide between work and private life, or not work life, however that might be cast. And the intimacy that you might experience, like sharing those kinds of moments, would be much more aligned with and appropriate for like your immediate work, your coworkers, for example, and maybe even a smaller subset of your coworkers as opposed to company at large. And now many of us have actually expanded our network through this shelter in place time, and in a lot of and created deeper relationships at the same time. So, we got to know our customers in a way that we got to know their kids, right? We got to know the crises that they were having, and they got to know us at the same time. So, I mean, there's a much deeper connection that we've made because we've been forced to interact in a digital framework. Gen Z has opted to and had the opportunity to do exactly that level of connection. We're just now coming into it, right? And so when you think about Gen Alpha, so I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and I think it's 8 years old is ish, 8 to 12 maybe is the Gen Alpha, and less. Gen Alpha age right now. So yeah, it's that generation, even what they're growing up with is content creation, right?
Right.
And anecdotally, if you watch them, their overall capacity for creating content and interacting with that content in a way that's entertaining for them, like that, they would rather do that than watch TV, right? They would rather do that than many other activities. And then that's going to continue to empower them to tell stories at scale. So, I mean, it's like we're entering into a really neat, the power of TikTok is amazing in that it enables content creation like no other platform.
Yeah.
And that's, and the stuff that like scales there quickly is the stuff that's almost hokey. It's the unprofessional or non-professional. I mean, they're obviously getting, the real content creators getting paid for it, but you look at the quality of what they're doing, it doesn't come across as like, this is from some big network production, right? Even if it might be, but yeah. So Gen Alpha is going to be your son will be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So 10 years from now, we'll do another episode just like this, focused on Gen Alpha.
Oh,
And
the
we'll have
walker.
the same questions. Yeah. I hope we won't have a walker in 10 years.
I do too.
I think we'll be okay. But for now, we'll stick with Gen Z. And why is it important for brands, for researchers within these brands to understand Gen Z?
It has to do with brand loyalty. So there's major milestones that happen in a person's life at which time your brand loyalty can be disrupted. So for example, I mean, you have one child, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And so you remember what it was like after you had given birth to your son, and the amount of sort of that period of lack of sleep that happened probably directly afterwards. Right?
Yeah. I've completely blocked it out. I don't recall it at all, but yes.
It was awful, right?
Yeah. Rough going for a few months, that's for sure.
Right. And so like during that period of time, you're borderline, not you, but I was borderline like losing it. And so everything was kind of around, all my decisions were around convenience. I didn't care about like the brand of toilet paper that I was picking out. Whereas I might care about that. I like Charmin, but I'm just going with whatever was on the shelf in front of me at that particular point in time, because you're operating in a completely different, sleep deprived framework. And so anyway, as you think about consumer journeys at that point, and of course, brands know this, they target you as a consumer because you're disruptible in terms of your brand preference.
Mhm.
And then once that brand is established in your behavior, it's hard to unseat it. So people that like a certain type of beer, they like that type of beer, and that's it, right? We have moved to buying our things on Amazon. It's going to be hard for an incumbent to come in and say, I'm going to start taking the competing with that procurement platform.
Mhm.
And because it's just part of our lives. And so Gen Z is making connection with brands because they have exposure to brands at all the time. You think about previous generations, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, and we were exposed to brands when we would consume media, which is right, magazines, newspapers, and TVs, and then obviously later on with more exposure to the internet. But in our lives, the internet exposure wasn't until much later. With Gen Z, their internet exposure is all the time. And so when they're on Twitch, when they're on Discord, when they're playing their free to play games on YouTube, they're exposed to brands all the time. And so it is imperative that brands begin the conversation and connecting with Gen Z right now. And that connection needs to happen on the platforms where they are, and in the context of that platform.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's about, reaching people where they are with the content that's going to be relevant for them in that moment. It's interesting that the concept of brands kind of identifying these disruptable moments to try to gain share. So you mentioned obviously having a child and being exhausted. What are some of those other milestones in a person's life journey where they're most disruptible from a brand loyalty perspective?
Of course, getting married is a point of
Mhm.
disruption.
Mhm.
I've been married a few times. I'm really good at it. And, you wind up usually having some sort of, decision on what brand of going back to the toilet paper example, what brand of toilet paper you're going to wind up using, because you're not going to obviously stock both. Similarly, you think about like alcohol consumption. Alcohol consumption changes as based on particular events, and particular types of events change based on life. So, I've got a son who's now living in a fraternity. So his alcohol choices probably very much in line with beer and cheap liquor. And then as he, evolves in life, and then he'll wind up with a different set of choices and frequency of use. So you have sort of this like life stage choices. So as you move into professional environment, maybe it becomes, and your social circle is more like fine wines. Mine's not, but maybe it is. Then you sort of adopt that what is socially acceptable. But my point is that like those events, they don't happen very often. And so it's imperative that brands get in front of this generation, because now is a time that they are forming those connections with the brands that they will carry forward with them until they have a major life event.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm laughing because right now in this moment, so I live down the street from the local high school, and the high school has just gotten out, and the Gen Zers are zipping past my house right in this moment. So we are having my daily dose of Gen Z at 2:30 in the afternoon every day.
we should
Anyhow,
have we should have one of them jump on the show, right? I mean, yeah.
come in here. I've got some questions for you about brand loyalty. Well, you know what? Actually, this is there. Maybe that's not the best way to reach them. But what is the best way to reach Gen Z when you're thinking about capturing insights? Like, are there differences in how we want to, capture those insights from Gen Z from other generations?
Yeah, there's a lot of difference. Um, when research started back in really, I think it was like the 30s, right? The classic, the door-to-door feedback. But when it really started scaling, it was quantitative research, was predominantly RDD, or random digit dialing, using the phone book. So you would just start in the white pages, randomly opening it up, and you dial the first number and just kind of keep working through accordingly. Obviously, phone is not an effective way to be able to reach people. My phone rings 10 times a day, at least, with telemarketers, all of which I'm not ever going to participate in a survey or any other thing. There's just like so low trust of people that don't know you trying to reach you through your phone. People aren't willing to usually provide feedback in that mechanism. So we know that phone doesn't work. And Gen Z, of course, has such a propensity to use their devices more often than other generations. And so therefore they're less sort of willing to put up with bad user experience. They have a much higher or lower tolerance for bad experiences, is what I'm trying to say. And so it's imperative that we are able to communicate and ask them questions for research purposes in the context of the app or the situation that makes sense for them. And that's why, people hate it when I say this. Researchers can't stand this, but like, you just can't expect a Gen Zer to participate in the standard brand tracker, right? You're not going to get them to sit down and give you thoughtful answers over a 20-minute period of time in a survey that is a bunch of reading that basically requires a desktop experience. Over 80% of the surveys, I'd be really interested to know on Vox Pop Me, actually, like, do you have any visibility on what proportion are done of your survey taken or done on mobile devices?
We definitely have that data that I can pull an accurate number, but like anecdotally, most of it is mobile.
Yeah, totally.
Even on the B2B side, like
Mhm.
even just navigating our business website, it's more than 50% mobile. And most of that audience isn't even Gen Z. So, it has become the default, whereas 10 years ago, or maybe even less, honestly, in the industry, there was a difference. Like, oh, we need to
Huge.
be doing mobile research. Like, sometimes I still hear people talk about doing mobile research. I'm like, everything has got to be mobile, because that's how we sort of subconsciously choose to interact. I mean, I booked flights in a hotel on my cell phone the other
Mhm.
day. Like, I'm it's so much easier to do that than it was several years ago, that there's no reason to get on your desktop anymore if you don't want to.
If you think about like your desktop utilization right now, um, people are playing video games. Like there's
Mhm.
like a subset that is, they need a high powered PC in order to do that thing. It's work. So, we're writing a lot, like typing. It's ineffective to kind of reduce my digits from 10 to 2, right? Thumbs.
Mhm.
In my if I'm trying to like do some sort of long form blog post or write a script, or for deep work like editorial, like editing of content, post processing for me, like podcasts, things like that, I'll do on my desktop. But like if I want to take a survey, I'm not going to sit down at my computer and take a survey. I'm going to do it in between the cracks of life, right? So I'm going to do it when I'm sitting outside, um, having a cup of coffee, taking a break or something, not in front of my computer, because the context is just like, it just doesn't work for me, right? And I'm old, so so, and my kids, they're not gonna take a survey in front of on a computer, because again, the unless it's paying them a lot of money, their willingness to, they think of a computer as either entertainment or school, and
Mm.
surveys are neither one. So, if you're doing in-depth interviews, this is kind of interesting. I've noticed that people will tend to use a computer if they're doing an in-depth interview with me, participants, and even undirected, right? But having said that, when I do an open-ended question in a survey that's video-based, the majority of the responses I get are actually mobile-based responses.
Right.
And when you start cutting that down, we just did a study among 500 Gen Zers. They were predominantly like over 80% done video capture on a mobile device. So like I'll give you this example of this really happened. I got fired by a Fortune 5 company about 15 years ago. Oh gosh, 12 years ago. What happened is they had a NPS like study. NPS, it's an 11-point scale. Question is usually something like, how likely are you to refer a friend or family member to us, right? I mean, that's the gist of it. Starts at 0 and goes to 10. So that's your 11 points, right? And so on a desktop, we all know what that looks like. It's a grid format, right? It's some question text, and then underneath it, you've got your sad to happy scale. And then, the inputs that the person will click on their screen. So it's this like, is this vertical? Vertical?
Horizontal.
Anyway, horizontal. Thank you. Horizontal. Vertical. Okay. Horizontal framework. But okay. So this work started in 2005, and the company created a baseline of their NPS score. And then 2006, Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. Everything's fine. We had complete stability. They actually moved. This is obviously a publicly traded company, top 5. They moved to a executive compensation based on the results of the NPS. And then fast forward just a short 4 years, they had noticed and were terrified that their NPS was dropping dramatically quarter after quarter. Now, that particular survey that was programmed on a platform I will not mention, but may have had something to do with, was not mobile enabled, meaning that it required a fixed width horizontal view of the grid. But only 6 points could be shown on the mobile device before you had to scroll over.
Wow.
And so what wound up happening is there was a relationship with mobile phone adoption and their lowering NPS. So participants, instead of seeing the full 11 points, were seeing a 6-point scale, and then they were answering accordingly. Obviously, we got fired. It was a big problem. We got fired. It felt like a really big problem for us, but it was a much bigger problem for them because they had been compensating staff, right? They're a publicly traded company. They were reporting on these numbers. And so, the point is that like the world is changing. The world has changed. The world will continue to change. Facebook's point of view right now on the metaverse should be something we're paying attention to. And we have to acknowledge that, right? Like we can't just keep doing things the way that we've been doing them because we're afraid of that change or afraid of the implications it will make on backwards compatibility of our data. Like it is imperative that we are on the cutting edge of change, of being willing to think about and challenge the way that we do research, the way that we ask questions, the adoption of video. The amount of words per second for Gen Z is much less than it is for Gen X. You're typing, right? And the reason why is because that's how my generation input information. Their generation doesn't necessarily have to do it like that. They can leverage things like voice to text that is pretty accurate. And also now that informs, right, my survey design. Because if I ask somebody that's in their 40s an open-ended question, I'm probably going to get a much fuller response than somebody that's younger. Similarly, if I ask somebody that's comfortable using a laptop versus somebody that's using a cell phone, I'm going to get different types. I'm going to get a shorter, more concise answer on the cell phone. It's just practical, right? And so we have to have that understanding as we're framing out our survey instruments. Otherwise, we're kind of like, we're creating a lot of bias in our research.
Right. We're accidentally moving from an 11-point to a 6-point scale without realizing it.
And we're doing it in the guise of like, well, this is like research that's comparable year over year.
Right.
But it's not.
Right. Right.
You're measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're definitely gonna have to have another conversation about metaverse separately, but I don't think we have time to dig into that
No.
today, but I would love to have that chat. Um, so where do you think brands right now are struggling, or are they struggling to understand Gen Z? Certainly we've struggled to understand millennials for many, many, many years and maybe still struggle. So it feels like we're maybe a little bit more on the forefront of trying to get that understanding of Gen Z. But where do you think people are struggling right now?
I mean, yes, 100% brands are struggling to understand Gen Z.
Yeah.
There's some brands that are doing it really well right now. Taco Bell is crushing it. The Yum is investing a lot in you had asked a question which I had not intentionally dodged, but about how you do recruiting, and the way that you recruit Gen Z, I've found, is it's harder and more expensive to recruit them against the traditional panels. And I'm not throwing any of my friends under the bus that are in that ecosystem, but like, the predominant way that panels are soliciting people are through paywalls, right? So it's somebody's doing something online and they get an interruption of their service because the way that they pay for that service is by participating in some research. Okay. So a good example, the classic example is I'm playing video poker free, and I need to earn more chips. And so the way that I do that is some activity, like participate in a survey. So that represents a significant portion of how traditional panels have been sourcing over the last 15 years. Today, Gen Z, like they have a connection of money to time that is very unique. They're also more entrepreneurial minded than millennials or other generations. The reason why is their level of opportunity has increased, and the barriers between them actually creating a side job, a side hustle, leveraging the gig economy is like, it's very easy for them to do that now. Going back to my son, he has a 35-hour a week job. He uses that to pay his core living expenses. And if he wants to do something else, then he also drives for Uber Eats. So you've got, and it's a switch he turns on when he wants to turn it on. My other son, he's now 16. He loves video games, and he started streaming on Twitch. Again, another great way for him to be able to earn income on the side that he can just do as he sees fit, right? I'm doing an interview this week with a influencer. She has over 2 million people following her on Instagram. She makes more money than, outside of selling companies, more money than I ever have made, like by a major factor a year. Yeah. Like serious money. And she does it on OnlyFans. So it's crazy, right? So, and she's 22. So you've got this, and so she's kind of like on the older side of it. But my point is that, like, this generation is a generation that has access to be able to monetize their time that is completely different than previous generations have thought about things. Additionally, millennials were really framed by the Great Recession. Their view of money, they're more likely to have money in savings accounts as opposed to investments or starting a company, whereas Gen Z has a higher appetite for things like digital currencies and investing in themselves as a side hustle sort of initiative. If we're going to be honest about it, need to think about the time trade-off of they're going to spend money or spend time with you. And what are they actually getting out of that, right? And so to that end, we need to be thinking a lot about the incentivization that's happening for participants, because the current incentivization model that exists doesn't play well with Gen Z. And that's why, one of the things that we found to be successful, and I think you at Vox Pop Me have as well, is as you connect with influencers on social platforms like TikTok, then you have an opportunity to have an oversized return on people wanting to join your panel. But you've got to be able to pay them appropriately. Now, I'm not saying it needs to be a living wage, but it needs to be something, right? Not cents. It needs to be measured in dollars.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's got to be something that like compares time-wise and value-wise to driving for Uber Eats or, in creating content and getting paid for it. Like
Right.
I still don't even understand how people get paid for like TikTok and Instagram stuff, but
It's all about the
clearly I don't have
followers.
that big of a followership to be anywhere close to that. But yeah, it's got to be comparable. And I would also argue that because potentially market research could never come close to that, to what they could earn doing other things, that there is this intrinsic value in feeling like you are influencing the brands that Gen Z really cares about. They do care that brands are making decisions based on their feedback. So we need to this is something that I've always criticized about our industry. I don't think we've ever done a really good job of closing the loop with the people that were, making really critical business decisions based on their feedback. We're not closing the loop with them to say, thank you for your feedback. Here's what we did with it. And this feels like Gen Z feels like a generation that really cares about that. And there's a huge opportunity where if we can't offer them the type of incentive that's going to have them choose to participate in research as opposed to drive for Uber Eats, then we can at least provide them with that closing of the loop to say, you're making a difference in our brand or in our services or in our products.
You just like totally nailed it. But now this is super interesting, right? Because now you think about the paywall model, which is where you have the majority of completes that are currently being sourced. Well, that doesn't work because there's no like connection between that human who participated in the research and the ability to be able to tie back to that.
Right.
And so, what I think is interesting is what you're doing at Vox Pop Me, in that, you have a curated, I know you use third party as well, but you have a curated panel that you use for video research. And what's powerful about that is, as you think about like your customers, like part of the unlock for your customers is they have the ability through social now to create their own private communities for research purposes in an ongoing way. So they can do things like longitudinal research very effectively, cost effectively and time effectively. And they can also leverage that same audience for ad hoc research bolted on top of it. And they're solving a bunch of problems by doing that. The biggest problem that they're solving, in my opinion, is they are actually creating a better sample source that will be just nobody else would be able to touch from a quality perspective. And when I did the research for Gen Z most recently, I did 15 one-on-one interviews among Gen Zers. And I asked the question, why do you participate in research? And categorically, they were saying the same thing that I've heard for the last 2 decades in the space. They're saying, because I want to make a difference. What's different about Gen Z, though, is unless they feel like they're going to make a difference, then that's one of their big motivators. So you're absolutely right. Like, we have to figure out how we can cycle back to those audiences some information about the impact that they're making.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it done well in the past, even in like ad campaigns where,
Oh, yeah.
I think SodaStream did a really brilliant one several years ago where they showed the results from a consumer study. Like they literally put the results in the ad. It was a very obvious way, I guess, to kind of close that loop and say, hey, we've listened to you. Here's how.
Totally.
But I think there's a lot of other creative ways we can be doing that as an industry. And like you said, they want to know that you're actually using that they're being heard, and otherwise they're not going to want to participate.
You know who else did that really well was Dove. Do you remember their commercials?
Yes, absolutely. They were another one that did a really good job. And actually, you mentioned that you felt like Taco Bell was doing a good job of reaching Gen Z.
Absolutely.
How so?
I mean, if you look on their TikTok, so I look on companies' TikTok
Yeah.
accounts, and you're able to see the investment that they're making there. And you had mentioned that, I don't know how they make that kind of money, and that's exactly right. Like, they've got to grow an audience. We actually, you and I know exactly how to do it, right? It's not ambiguous. But TikTok influencers or Instagram influencers or whatever, right? You look at TikTok's really important because if you look at Statistica's data, they grew by, I'm going to probably misquote it, but I want to say it was around 40%, and which was a factor of almost 2x the second place during the pandemic. So the 2020 portion of it. So the adoption of utilization, especially among the younger consumers, has just been through the roof on that content platform. In fact, TikTok, as you've probably seen, they are launching a TV streaming service. So I don't know if it's free or not. It might be, but
it probably will be to start. And just when they get everyone hooked, then they'll
yeah, you and I are going to be scrolling.
Right. Then they'll all of a sudden they'll charge you and you'll be so in love with the service that you can't
Yeah.
not pay for it.
Bye Disney Plus. I don't know.
Maybe
not. Maybe.
Yeah.
So it depends on if they keep their Mandalorian series going, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the TikTok, or sorry, Taco Bell has been masterful at partnering with different influencers. Some in Gen Z. I mean, the nice part about TikTok as a platform is it has cross-generational or intergenerational influencers there. And they've been masterful with their ability to be able to partner with those content creators and then push relevant content that is authentic to the voice of the content creator themselves. And so they have aligned themselves very strongly with the LGBTQ community. And that's the other part, right? Is that I asked a question an unneeded question in the research that I did with Gen Z. And I said, tell me what your favorite brands are. And I said, tell me why this, whatever brand X is your favorite brand. And inevitably, and I have all the video, I presented these videos to at the Insights Association CRC conference recently in Dallas. The answer was like almost everybody said, the first thing they said was the company stands for something that I believe in or is ethical, or like it isn't necessarily about the value transaction. I mean, they don't want to be taken advantage of, right? It is more about supporting companies that are in line with that have stuff that they want to buy. So that's like first and foremost, and to have stuff that they can afford, obviously. But like after those table stakes are gone, then they're making a choice based on the, alignment of values that they have. And Taco Bell's done a very good job of being crystal clear on their point of view on different controversial issues.
Yeah. It does seem, as just our consumer lives change and what's available to us, like expectations just continue to change. Like I'm not, companies can't really compete on, I don't know, like, I mean, they shouldn't be trying to compete on like shipping charges anymore. Like everywhere you go, you can get free shipping. Whereas in the past, I might choose to buy at one place or another because one offered free shipping and one didn't. So as all those differentiators just go away over time, it comes down to, I can get a product that's going to do the job from a lot of different places, probably for a relatively low cost or similar cost. So, how am I making the choice between one and the other? It is about values and what they stand for. I also have I'm so impressed by Gen Z in a lot of ways. And they just seem like kind of a no BS generation. Like we're not going to buy from companies that don't, stand for something that we believe in, and we're not going to, like you said, be taken advantage of. There's a lower tolerance for bad experiences. We talk a lot on the show about like brand responsiveness, like how can, how important is it for brands to be responsive? And, Gen Z just seems like a generation that, again, like, you the expectations are so high, and it is so there's so much choice out there that you kind of have to um be perfect, right? You've got to provide the
You do.
experience that they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. It used to be the case that the company that had the biggest budget would win
Mhm.
consumer attention.
Right.
And that's just not even remotely true now. I mean, it helps a lot. Don't get me wrong. Like, it helps tremendously, but it just isn't the case. You can go viral. Like, you can go viral doing, there's my first spammer. You can go viral having terrible content, and it just somehow connects with the audience. I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that's trending right now with respect to Island Boys on TikTok, but there's these two
I
guys.
don't know Island Boys.
Oh
I
my
feel like
gosh,
now
you
I
gotta look
need
at
to
Island
know
Boys.
Island
I
Boys.
feel like everybody should look at Island Boys. It's just such a great story of
Okay.
they're basically have become this meme. And they're blown up, positive and negative. They've blown up. And so it just goes to show you that you just never know what kind of content is going to win in today's market. And you just have to be in front of it and actively, involved in those, you have to talk, it's really easy. Edwin Wong told me a long time ago when I was interviewing him, head of insights for BuzzFeed. And he said, if you want to build a community, you go to where the people are and you talk about what they want to talk about, right? That's it. And so again, if you look at companies like McDonald's had their recent campaign around teachers, really enabling teachers and supporting teachers. And they had a whole competition around teachers, who was going to be the best, and enrollment students could, vote for their teacher or whatever. I know about this because my wife is a teacher. She didn't get nominated, so she was a little disappointed. But
that feels like it should have been your job to nominate her.
I didn't find out until she had already known. Anyway, it's a long story. You're right, though. She agrees with you. It was definitely my fault. So so McDonald's has done a really good job on social. If you look at their different accounts, especially on TikTok, of making a strong investment in that community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the other thing that's important is the experience isn't just digital. I think a lot of companies think about connecting with Gen Z, meaning that, I've got to be on TikTok. I mean, that's part of it, but you have to create this contiguous experience between your digital experience and your in-store experience. In the research that I did, 70% of Gen Zers said that they would prefer to make purchases in person. Now, the majority of their purchases will not be made in person. And they knew that as well, but they would prefer to be able to make those purchases in person. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting dichotomy that's taking place in terms of what you see actually taking place versus what they're saying. So there's this preference, then there's the actual behavior. But what I found, what's interesting about online is, in an online environment, you're able to usually, I talked about this a little bit at the Insights Marketing Day, when you were there, but the Gap, they launched a series on we're going to make sure that we stock all sizes. Yeah, I love that, right? Because I'm height challenged. I'm 5'8" and so if I want to find a 30-30 jeans, their jeans are usually they don't stock those or 29-30. Good luck with that. You're never going to find that jean. And so there's this social shaming that can happen, whether you're plus size or short or tall or whatever, right? And if you're not quote unquote in the norm, then you can feel kind of bad. And what's interesting about Gen Z is, even though I'm not the majority, right? If I was, then everybody would stock my sizes. Gen Z will actually connect with me as being maybe disadvantaged, or that's not the right word, but being not mainstream enough. And so they will start aligning and with my persona and feeling bad about the brand experience, even though they may have a positive brand experience. And that's why when you think about like when a brand, when the Gap announced that we're going to stock all sizes, like the brilliant thing about that was, they were saying to everybody, we're equal. Like, we're not just saying, like, you can be the edges of the bell curve and we're as aligned with you as we are with the middle, right, of the bell curve. And so Gen Z as a category says, we love that brand. It's very powerful from a communication perspective, but you don't get that insight unless you're like making the investment to understand who they are, and willing to then back it up with like, that's not cheap to do, right? That's expensive to create that, the fringe parts of the consumer base.
Sure. Yeah. And to your point, I mean, it used to be that, you might not be able to find those sizes in store, but don't worry, you can order them online. And Gen Z has really, the expectation is that we're going to have the same experience in store as we are having online.
Totally.
And so that is driving some of that. And it also seems as though they are a much more empathetic generation, and hopefully moving our society towards a more let's care about each other instead of instead of just, hey, my brand experience is good, so I'm not going to worry about your experience with that
Right.
brand.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So it's maybe a sign that the world is improving, we are moving in a good direction, we're talking more about empathy. I love it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
is. It is. And it's a double-edged sword too, because, it impacts our survey instruments. So when we think about how we ask questions, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, we need to be much more inclusive now, because we are not inclusive and somebody that's empathetic towards disadvantaged people groups takes your survey, they will start aligning with them, and that will have a bias inside of your survey results and how they perceive the subsequent
yeah.
questions that they're asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm actually in a couple of weeks going to be interviewing some reps from the Idea Council at Insights Association about exactly that topic. So stay tuned for that.
Fun.
We could clearly talk all day, so I'm going to cut us off here. But this has been great. I really appreciate you joining today, and we'll definitely have to do a follow up another time.
Absolute honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. Please remember to rate and review our show. Next week, we're going to be joined by another fellow podcaster, Joanna Lepore from Mars. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you soon.